Alberto Perez, 25-00288, council appearance.
Assistant Public Defender Sarah Donnelly on behalf of Defendant Alberto Perez, who is standing to my right.
Okay, this was the date set for a preliminary examination. This is for police officer fleeing third assault resisting obstructing officer. Are you ready to proceed?
Before we proceed, Your Honor, the people have extended an offer in this matter for the defendant to plead guilty to an attempted flee and elude fourth, a misdemeanor, and attempted police and officer assaulting and resisting obstructing, also a misdemeanor. That offer expires at the start of the preliminary exam. My understanding that the defendant has been presented with that offer and is choosing to decline, and so the people are prepared to continue.
That's correct, sir. Okay. If the offer is expired, you can call your witness.
You can call Officer Rogers.
You solemnly raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. You can have a seat. You state your first and last name and spell both.
Catherine Rogers, KATHERINE ROGERS.
You can proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer, with whom are you currently employed?
The Lansing Police Department,
How long have you been employed with Lansing Police Department?
less than a year.
Less than a year. Okay. What are your responsibilities with Lansing Police Department?
I am an officer of the law,
What do you do for Lansing Police Department?
road patrol.
Okay. And what are some of the responsibilities you serve as road patrol?
We take calls from dispatch and we try to limit crime.
Okay. Do you also monitor traffic
Yes,
for traffic offenses?
yes,
Okay. And were you working in this capacity on January 31st of this year?
yes.
And were you working by yourself at that time?
No,
Who was with you?
Jake Ellis.
And who is Jake Ellis?
He is a FTO I was riding with,
What does FTO stand for?
field training officer.
Okay. So there were two of you working together on January 31st?
Yes,
Do you recall attempting to make a traffic stop that night that resulted in a flee and elude?
yes.
Can you tell the court about that, please?
We were on North MLK and we had noticed a plate on a gray Porsche that was expired. We ran it. It came back to a BMW. It turned west onto Oakland.
Okay, so the plate was
Yes.
improper? Okay. And then you said the vehicle turned west onto Oakland?
Yes.
Once you noticed the plate did not belong to that vehicle, what did you and Officer Ellis decide to do?
Initiate a traffic stop.
Okay, and had you done that before the vehicle turned west onto Oakland?
No.
Okay, so you followed the vehicle west onto Oakland,
Yes.
and then what happened?
Officer Ellis initiated the headlights.
Okay.
Or the upper beam on top of the patrol car
And what was the purpose of that?
to initiate the traffic stop.
Okay, and were you positioned close enough to this vehicle that from your perspective, the driver of the Porsche should have known that the traffic stop was being effected?
Yes.
What happened next?
After Officer Ellis initiated his lights, the vehicle continued on Oakland westbound at approximately 30 to 35 miles per hour. Did not slow down and continued on.
Okay, and was the vehicle doing the speed limit at the time?
I don't recall the speed limit for that area.
Okay, did you have any concerns at the time of this vehicle speeding? But you had initiated your lights, and from what you could tell, did it look like the vehicle? Strike that. Okay. So you saw the vehicle turn off. What do you remember? What road it turned off on?
Off of Oakland, it turned onto Kaywood.
Kaywood. And then what happened next?
The vehicle continued south on Kaywood, and then it turned into the driveway of, I don't recall the address.
If I were to tell you 721 Kaywood Street, does that sound
Yeah.
correct to you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, while he's driving into this driveway, was the overhead lights on your squad car on this whole time?
Yes,
And you were following him throughout this time?
yes.
How close would you say you were to this vehicle with your overhead lights on during this period?
I'm not entirely sure.
Within so many car lengths, maybe could you guess?
I would say approximately 1 to 2 car lengths,
Okay, 1 to 2 car lengths and no traffic between you?
no traffic between us.
Okay, thank you. So once he pulled into the driveway at 721 Kaywood, is that still in the city of Lansing?
Yes,
Is that County London?
yes.
What happened next?
Perez then got out of the vehicle. Officer Ellis and I stepped out of the vehicle. Officer Ellis gave verbal commands. And then Perez had turned away from us and began to walk in front of his car. And we went after him.
Okay, let me ask you this. The squad car that you're in with the overhead lights, is that a marked Lansing Police Department vehicle?
Yes,
And how were you dressed that night?
I was dressed fully in my Lansing Police Department uniform.
And was Officer Ellis dressed the same way?
Yes,
So when you got out of your vehicle after that vehicle had parked, did you announce yourself as police?
I can't say what Officer Ellis said, but I had followed suit with him. I did not say anything.
Okay, fair enough, but you are dressed in your uniform.
Yes,
And what was the commands that were given to this person that got out of the vehicle? Do you recall?
I don't recall, and I can't speak for Officer Ellis.
Okay. Did you say anything?
I did not.
Um, All right, so you saw this person walk in front of his vehicle? Did he acknowledge you at all?
He faced us and then turned away from us and began to walk away.
Okay. Did he say anything to you when he faced you?
I don't recall.
All right. Was he walking away or running away?
I don't recall at what pace he was moving away from us.
Okay, you don't remember walking or running?
No, I don't.
Okay. But he didn't stop, correct? Did you have an opportunity to catch up to him?
Yes.
All right, what happened when you caught up to him?
Officer Ellis had taken him to the ground, and then I held onto his feet.
Okay. Officer Ellis took him to the ground and you held him at his feet. Why was he taken to the ground?
Because we were placing him under arrest.
Did he stop when he was instructed to stop?
I don't believe so.
Was he told to stop?
I don't recall what.
So you would agree that people can be taken into handcuffs without being thrown to the ground, correct?
Yes,
You've been trained to do that?
yes.
Did something happen in this case that required the defendant to be taken to the ground in order to put handcuffs on?
Yes, he kept moving away from us and would not. He just kept going and would not stop.
Okay. What, in your opinion, would have given him the impression that he had to stop?
Verbal commands.
All right, and what were those verbal commands? Do you recall?
I don't specifically recall what Officer Ellis had said.
Okay. Was he given a command to stop?
I don't entirely recall.
1 minute. Were you wearing a body-worn camera that night?
Yes,
Around the time, the subject in the Porsche got out of his vehicle, did you activate your body-worn camera?
yes,
If you were to view the contents of your body-worn camera, would that help refresh your memory?
yes,
Your Honor, for the purposes of refreshing the witness's memory, may
I think you're already in there.
I already in there? Let's see. Okay, here we go. And recognize this?
yes,
Is this your body camera?
yes,
I believe when you activate your body camera, the first 30 seconds or so is of the recording is from back. So there's usually no sound for the first 30 seconds. Does that sound right?
yes.
Incident assigned.
Okay. 32, we are really slow stop. We're going about 15 miles an hour south on Kaywood right now.
Copy, slow to stop. Any units closer than 33?
Ben's just wants an ambulance.
Your incident has been updated.
Start that way. 32 stop.
I'm here. I'm not doing anything. I said I'm here. Hey, I'm here, brother. Hey. I said I'm here. I'm not doing anything.
When the red and blues go on for you to stop your car, you stop your car.
Okay, I just stopped right at my house.
No, you stop when I light you up at King and Oakland.
And what? Okay, I'm here.
32, he tried to run.
I'm not trying to run anything.
We were at
I seen that guy was going to my house. I'm not running anything. I was going to my house.
Well, now you're under arrest, dude.
Okay, but I'm not running. I stopped right at my house.
Okay, so does that help refresh your memory as to what happened after he stopped at that house?
Yes,
Okay. So what we saw is when you got out of your vehicle, it looks like he was trying to get away from you. Is that how you would describe it?
yes,
Okay.
This wasn't an exhibit, just to refresh.
Just to refresh, yes, Your Honor. And then, did it look like he was thrown to the ground, or did it look like he fell over while running away?
I wouldn't say he was thrown to the ground. But
Would you say it was pretty clear, based on what you were able to observe that night, that he was trying to get away from you?
yes,
Um, One more second. The squad car you were driving, was that equipped with a camera facing forward?
yes,
And that camera operates when the overhead lights are operated, is that correct?
yes,
And was your camera working that night, do you recall?
I believe so.
Would you recognize the camera if you would see it?
Yes,
Your Honor, I haven't downloaded this to a USB drive, but I would be requesting that this be admitted as People's Exhibit 1.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. People wanted to admit it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Public for the court.
Yes.
I am going to try to share my screen. So do you recognize this?
yes,
Does that look like your the dash cam from your squad car?
yes,
And do you see the date up there in the upper right-hand corner?
yes,
Is this the date and time of the traffic stop that we're discussing today?
yes,
Okay. I'm gonna play this. And so this would be North MLK, like you testified before, is that right?
yes,
And I think he's gonna be making a left-hand turn up here. This is gonna be on to, is it, I believe it's westbound to Oakland, is that right?
yes,
Okay, so far the overhead lights are not activated, is that correct?
yes.
And right here, you can see the red lights indicating that the traffic stop is contested, correct?
Yes,
And we can see the vehicle in front of it is not stopping. Is that-
Incident assigned.
35 to 35. 2146. I don't see that wrong.
35 10. Okay.
32, we are really slow to stop. We're going about 15 miles an hour south on Kaywood right now.
Copy, slow to stop. Any units closer than 33?
Sims just wants an ambulance.
Your incident has been
25, yeah, you
updated.
start that way. 32 stop. But keep one open.
Your incident has been updated.
Yeah, it looks like the caller was at 10:35. That's it.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of what you recall happening that night?
yes,
Were you able to get ID of this person?
I don't recall.
Did you run his name through the law enforcement information network?
Yes,
Did you check his ID?
I don't believe I did.
Okay. But you were part of the arrest, taking him into custody, correct?
Yes,
And so I assume you would recognize him if you saw him again?
yes,
Did you see him in court today?
yes.
Can you point to him and identify an article of clothing that you're wearing?
He's sitting right there in the gray sweater.
Your Honor, I'd ask that record reflect ID.
Any objections to identification?
No, Your Honor, just for the record, she did point towards defense counsel table.
Identification is noted.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Officer Rogers. You testified today that you've been with Lansing Police Department for, you said, less than a year?
Yes,
All right, do you have any other previous experience in any other departments?
I do not.
And have you ever testified in court before?
I have not.
So this is your first time testifying, all right. Your testimony was that you were riding along with your field training officer, Officer Jake Ellis, correct?
Yes,
So you would be in the front passenger seat.
yes,
All right, and we saw on the video that that Officer Ellis initiated the lights on the patrol vehicle after defendant's car had turned west onto Oakland Avenue, correct?
yes.
All right, and you said on direct, you said you didn't recall what the speed limit was on that section of Oakland.
Yes,
You don't. But you do know it's what? How many lanes across is it right there? You recall?
I do not.
But it's multiple lanes and they're all going one way, correct?
Yes.
All right. All right, and then we saw in the video where you said on direct that you estimated that, or the speed the car was going was about 30 to 35 miles an hour.
Yes,
All right, and you said you didn't slow down on Oakland,
yes.
but it did the vehicle at all times while it was on Oakland speed up?
No,
Okay. So essentially it maintained speed until it turned, was it south on Kaywood?
yes,
All right. And then per your video and per your on direct, you testified that it pulled into a driveway at 707 Kaywood. No, I'm sorry, 702 Kaywood. Does that sound about right? I think that was what you on direct, when the prosecutor asked you if he said that it was at 702 Kaywood, would you dispute that? Is that where the car pulled into the driveway? Do you recall that?
I believe it was a different address other than 702. It started with a 7.
Let's first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it does. Okay.
Yeah.
Same address.
All right, Your Honor, may I have approached? I'm gonna refer here. So that you read it. This is your report. If you could let me know when you see the address that it stopped at.
Right here. Into the driveway of 721 Kaywood Street.
All right, so 7. Okay. All right, and at some point, did you determine or did you figure out that who that defendant lived at that address?
I don't recall.
Okay. We watched your we refreshed your memory with the video of your we watched your body worn camera video, or refreshed your memory with your body worn camera video. Refreshing your memory with that video, do you recall the defendant making exclamatory statements?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you don't recall whether well, anything that Mr. Perez was saying after you detained him?
I don't recall.
Okay. All right, so at no point during this interaction before or after he's arrested, do you know who lives at 721 Kwood?
I don't recall.
Okay. I would, I know that was previously used to refresh your memory. I would like to enter as defense's exhibit A, her body worn camera that evening.
Any objection?
No.
Then say it
I gotta
again.
get.
No, I got it. I was waiting for. I know, I need to be let in, but if you want, I was gonna start it at 1:46.
Okay. 1 minute 46 seconds. Oh yeah, it's right here. She gets on.
I don't know if my mouse gone. My mouse button is gone. Did someone admit her because it's not letting me?
I was gonna let the prosecutor play. He's
Okay.
already still in there.
I
might-
did just,
is that
I
why
think
you're
I might need to change the batteries in my mouse. And I can make you co-host.
What?
Am I still sharing? Is that why you haven't done?
Yeah, I allowed you to share. I don't know if I made you co-host, but I'll make.
No,
you-
I had to be let in.
Oh, I see. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, and then at 1:46, right?
Oh, yep, yep.
Okay. So
On the ground. I'm here. I'm not doing anything. I said I'm here. Hey, but I'm here, brother. Hey. I said I'm here. I'm not doing anything.
When the red and blue is going for you to stop your car, you stop your car.
Okay, I stopped it right at my house.
No, you stop when I light you up at King and Oakland.
And what? Okay, I'm here.
32. You tried to run.
I'm not trying to run anything.
You're at.
I feel like I was going to my house. I'm not running anything. I was going to my house.
Well, now you're under arrest, dude.
Okay, but I'm not running. I stopped right at my house.
No, dude. When the police light you up, you stop.
Huh?
On a traffic stop. You don't just keep driving
Oh,
and then get out of the car and try to run into your house.
okay. Okay.
Hold on. I'm trying to double lock these.
Okay.
The handcuffs don't tighten up on me.
And what?
I'm trying to lock these so the handcuffs don't tighten up on me.
Oh, okay.
So Officer Rogers, on direct, we were trying to figure out if you could recall exactly what the verbal command that Officer Ellis gave Mr. Perez. After refreshing and viewing the evidence, did we come to did you recall whether you remember the exact verbal command that Ellis gave Perez?
I remember hearing him on the video, but in that moment,
You still can't recall what the exact command was?
no,
Okay, and you on direct said that you didn't say anything.
no.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Just briefly, so on cross, there was some questions about whether or not we've checked to see who lived at that address, correct? Do you remember that? What happened to the vehicle?
I personally did not deal with the vehicle, so I don't know what happened with it.
Were you present when anything happened with it?
I was present for the search, but other than that,
Nothing, okay. You said you couldn't remember what the command was given because there wasn't, after watching the video, there wasn't really a command, was there? That you could hear? But there was kind of a, did you remember hearing something that
yes,
sounded
I
like?
heard Officer Ellis say, don't.
And that's about all we could hear, right?
Yes,
And it looks like from what we could see in the dash cam video of the vehicle that you were in, that at the time Officer Ellis and the defendant were looking at each other in that moment, right?
yes,
And then you being present at the time, you recall after that exchange, the defendant moved away from you guys, correct?
yes.
No problem.
I made this witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
May be excused. Thank you. Call your next witness.
No further witnesses, Your Honor.
Let's call witnesses.
No, Your Honor.
We can proceed to argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure something out. Your Honor, the people asked that this be bound over as charged. That being count one, fleeing and looting in the third degree. We just asked that the court take judicial notice that the location here at North Martin Luther King and West Oakland, the speed limit is 35 miles per hour. And the count one, fleeing and looting third degree, the people have the burden of showing that first, that a police officer was in uniform and or was performing his or her duties, and that any vehicle driven by the officer was identified as a law enforcement vehicle. The testimony presented that the officer was in a Lansing Police Department once patrol vehicle. Second, that the defendant was driving, excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
Second, that the defendant was driving a motor vehicle. That was established, that we could see in the evidence in the dash cam video and the body cam video, as well as the testimony from the officer identifying the defendant as the person that she had interacted with that night. The defendant was driving a great Porsche. And third, that the officer ordered the defendant to stop. In this case, the traffic stop was conducted because of a report that the officers had taken upon noticing that a license plate was expired and discovering that the plate was also on the wrong vehicle. Fourth, that the defendant knew of the order. We saw in the video when the traffic lights came on, when the traffic stop was initiated and the overhead lights of the squad car came on, there were no other traffic on the road between the officer and the defendant. The defendant continued on for some ways without slowing down, turning off the road and then ultimately into a driveway. The conditions on the road at the time and at the time of night, given the distance between the squad car and the defendant had reason to know that he was being subjected to a traffic stop by the officer. And then fifth, that the defendant refused to obey the order by trying to flee or avoid being caught. The dash cam video showed that the defendant continued on for a while, turned off the road and then into a driveway. And then even after stopping the vehicle, got out of the vehicle and then tried to get away from the officers. So therefore, based on the testimony and the evidence, the people would be asking that the defendant be bound over on count 1, fleeing and eluding in the 3rd degree. People would also ask that count 2 be bound over as charged. This is resisting and obstructing a police officer. The people have the burden of showing probable cause. First, that the defendant assaulted, battered, wounded, resisted, obstructed, opposed, or endangered. In this case, this was Officer Catherine Rogers, but present at the time was also Officer Jake Ellis, who were police officers with the Lansing Police Department. Second, that the defendant knew or had reason to know that these officers were officers performing their duties at the time. In this case, the defendant was followed by the officers in their marked patrol vehicle with the overhead lights on, clearly indicating that they were police officers. And then further, the testimony and the evidence also showed that when the defendant got out of the vehicle, he looked directly at what we could tell from the dash cam footage was Officer Jake Ellis, who was dressed in his Lansing Police Department uniform. Third, that the officer gave the defendant a lawful command, was making a lawful arrest, or was otherwise performing a lawful act. In this case, the officer was in the process of conducting a traffic stop for the defendant, again, based on the testimony relating from what was discovered to be an improper license plate. The officer and the defendant, from what we could see in the evidence, once again, looked directly at each other. The defendant was able to recognize the officer in uniform, who was in the process of effecting a traffic stop. The defendant started to walk away and move away from the officers. The officer did not give a command to stop, but things happened very quickly in those moments. The officer did say "don't" twice, that we could see and hear in the dash cam video and the body cam video, and the defendant moved away from the officer in spite of those commands. I think those are the 3 elements for count 2. Based on the testimony and the evidence presented, Your Honor, we would ask that this case be bound over as charged on counts 1, 2, and the habitual offender 4th notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Donald.
Thank you, Your Honor. The elements for both of these crimes are very much similar. Was there an officer in fully marked uniform or patrol car? I don't think that's in dispute. Did they have, were they engaging in their lawful duties? I believe that's not in dispute. In fact, the element I do want to focus on each of these offenses is the intent. They have to, yes, the burden is on the prosecutor. They have to show just probable cause, but they have to show probable cause for every element. And there is in each one of these offenses an intent element. It has to, they have to also show probable cause that Mr. Perez intended to, 1, flee the police, and 2, fail to comply with a lawful order. All right, so In the fleeing and eluding, the evidence today was solely from Officer Rogers. We did not hear from Officer Ellis. So Officer Rogers testified that Mr. Perez did not slow down, but he also did not speed up. He, after a few blocks on Oakland Avenue, he turned onto Kaywood, and then he pulled into a driveway. Now, Officer Ellis couldn't testify that she knew that this was his driveway, but we could hear from the evidence that Mr. Perez emphatically telling Officer Ellis, "This is my home, I'm just going home." So the argument, I guess, based on what we have so far, is that Mr. Perez was intending to flee or run away from the officers. That was his intention, was to elude them. But we can see from the evidence, there is no evidence that he was actually eluding the police. He himself said, "I was going home." His home, when the lights initiated, he simply had to go a few more blocks and turn left onto his street and pull into his driveway before he was home. So I don't believe that there's any evidence that shows today, in regards to fleeing and eluding the third offense, that Mr. Perez was trying to flee and or elude the police. And then they'll have to prove that at trial beyond a reasonable doubt. Today, it's just probable cause, and I don't even think they met that burden. In regards to the resisting and obstruction, we heard from Officer Rogers that she believes that there was some verbal command that Officer Ellis gave to Mr. Perez that evening. She doesn't recall what it is. I think that's important, Your Honor. If we need to figure out whether there's probable cause, Mr. Perez knowingly failed to violate a verbal command, we need to know what that verbal command was. Simply, the evidence that we've shown shows, we have video that shows very clearly that Ellis was engaging Perez once they were outside of their vehicles, and that you can see Mr. Perez backing up. And then what I believe in the video you see is Officer Ellis running for Mr. Perez, and then Mr. Perez, whether he was backing up, running away, you don't really see too much of that, except for you do see Ellis running towards him and tackling him in the front yard. So again, Your Honor, going back to the elements, they have to show some evidence that he intended to resist the officers, he intended to flee the officers. I don't believe that they presented any of that. I believe whatever you see here, it happened all so fast. By the video itself, Mr. Perez saying, "I was just trying to go home." He's a man, it's in the middle of the night. He, on a one-way street on Oakland, where there's nowhere to pull off to, and you just have to stop right in the middle of the lane. We would like the court to consider that whether or not there is sufficient evidence to show that Mr. Perez intended to flee or resist the officers. And if not, we ask that these matters be dismissed. Thank you.
Ms. Nickel, do you mind playing? I don't know. Was it you who played the video?
Yeah, which one, Your Honor? I did. I played both. Which one
It must be People's One.
Yes, Your Honor.
I believe it's the one that shows when they activated. Yeah, the dash cam.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll bring that up. Okay, here we go. Right here, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Start opening here.
Incident assigned.
35-10. Okay.
32, we are really slow to stop. We're going about 15 miles an hour south on Kaywood right now.
Copy, slow to stop. Any units closer than 33?
Ben's just wants an ambulance.
Okay, you can stop. Oh, today was a date scheduled for preliminary examination. The burden is on the prosecution to establish that there's more than mere suspicion that the felonies charged in this complaint were committed, and more than mere suspicion to charge you, Mr. Perez, as the person who committed these felonies. So this is not a trial. They don't need to prove each element beyond a reasonable doubt. The court will be the sole determiner of any credibility issues. And I'll also weigh the likelihood of the prosecution's success at trial. And so we have here count one, police officer fleeing, eluding in the third degree under the penal code, which would require that the prosecution prove first that the police officer was in uniform and was performing lawful duties, and that any vehicle driven by the officer was identified as a law enforcement vehicle. Second, that the defendant was driving a motor vehicle. Third, that the police officer or the officer ordered the defendant to stop his vehicle. Fourth, that the defendant knew of the order. Fifth, that the defendant refused to obey the order by trying to flee or avoid being caught. And then it says choose one or both of the following. Six, that the violation resulted in a collision or accident, which is not the case here, or some portion of the violation took place in an area where the speed limit was 35 miles per hour or less. And I think Mr. Nagel has put on the record for the court to take judicial notice of the speed limit. Also, when we played the dash cam, I did notice, it's a residential area, and I noticed just prior to turning left on, I believe it's the Kaywood Street address or street, there was a noted school zone on the pavement of the roadway. The officer today, Catherine Rogers, who is a relatively new officer, testified that on or about January 31st, 2025, that she, along with Officer Ellis, Jake Ellis, would effectuated a traffic stop on a vehicle for improper plate, that the vehicle continued or failed to stop after the Officer Ellis had initiated his lights. Vehicle continued and going in a speed limit, in an area where the speed limit was, she believed, of 35 miles per hour, and that the vehicle turned off Oakland onto Kaywood. That the entire time, from the time or the point that the vehicle, that the officers are in, activated their lights, to the time that the defendant got out of the vehicle, or the person that she identified in the court as the defendant got out of the vehicle, that they were 1 or 2 car lengths apart at most, that there was no traffic in between them. That at the time that the vehicle was stopped, that it was stopped at the area at 721 Kaywood, and that the defendant drove into the driveway of that residence. The defendant got out of the vehicle, turned toward the house, ignoring any commands, and attempted to go into the home. And he was at some point taken to the ground, or maybe fell to the ground and was taken into custody. The court saw the video, both dash cam and even the officer's video evidence. And the first element, which is that the police officer was in uniform and was performing their lawful duties, and that the vehicle driven by the officers, that's satisfied by the testimony of the officer. They were in fully marked uniforms, wearing their police uniforms in a fully marked police vehicle, and that they activated their lights. They activated those lights quite far from where the defendant even pulled into the driveway. It's not clear whether or not that's the actual address of the defendant, even though the defendant saying he's just going home. I don't even believe that there's a Kaywood address, as which we have on record, or that the defendant gave a Kaywood address at the time that he was arraigned as the place where he lives. Nonetheless, second, the defendant must have been driving a vehicle, which we saw evident in the testimony and in the video. The defendant, or the person identified in this court today as a defendant, was driving a vehicle. The question or concern I believe that the defense is arguing is whether or not there was an order for the defendant to stop the vehicle. I think when we're dealing with a fleeing and eluding, the order obviously is that the lights and the sirens are going out. It doesn't necessarily require the officers to yell out or to put on a bullhorn for you to stop your vehicle. It's commonly known in American society, I can't speak to other countries, but if an officer pulls behind you and they activate their lights, even if you didn't hear a siren, the activation of the lights behind you is as a signal to you that you are ordered to stop your vehicle. Or that the defendant knew of the order. Absolutely unequivocal based on the information there that I believe the defendant knew or had reason to know that there was law enforcement behind him flashing their lights and I heard sirens. Fifth, that the defendant refused to obey the order by trying to flee or elude. The defendant is, or the defense is arguing that the defendant didn't try to elude, that he was just trying to go home. I don't dispute that he was trying to go home or go wherever he was going. That's really not relevant where you were trying to go. If the officer stopped you, you were to stop. And that didn't take place in the video. The other concern that the court has is the argument that the lights of the officers were activated on MLK and that there was likely no safe place, I suppose, to pull over, which is why I had the prosecution replay the video, because I watched as the lights were activated while on MLK. We're passing the church, we're going down Oakland Ave, and we passed Sparrow Hospital and other businesses to the left where the defendant or the driver of the vehicle could have safely pulled into a parking lot of a business for the purposes of figuring out why he was being pulled over, which it appeared was for a traffic violation. And so, but that didn't happen. The signals were completely ignored. Well over a mile, the vehicle traveled, and even after it turned on Kaywood, I noted that there were areas on Kaywood. If maybe you didn't want to stop at the business or you didn't want to stop on Oakland because it's a busy road. Well, when you turned on Kaywood, I see that there was areas where the driver could have pulled over safely to the left side of the street on Kaywood off the main road so that the officer could effectuate their traffic stop. But that's not what happened. Even after the vehicle stopped at the address at 721 Kaywood, if that's the address, the additional concern is that the driver did not pull over for the purposes of handling the traffic stop order. The driver pulled over, jumps out the vehicle and tries to go in the house, and the officer's got to run up behind them and telling them that you just want to go home and that you're not doing anything is not the appropriate way to handle a traffic stop. And I have reason to believe, based on how this is charged, that the defendant should be familiar with how to do a traffic stop, because this is charged as a habitual offender, fourth offense notice, and one of the charges being that he was convicted of the offense of police officer fleeing. So I can't even reasonably believe that this is the first time that maybe this person has been pulled over and doesn't understand how you effectuate a traffic stop. So based on the testimony and evidence presented as to count one, there is sufficient probable cause as to count one that will be bound over to the circuit court. The count two police officer fleeing, eluding, I do agree. I'm sorry, assaulting, resisting, I do agree. The facts are and the elements are very similar. And the people would need to prove at trial that the defendant either assaulted, battered, wounded, resisted, obstructed, endangered, or opposed, in this case, Officer Jake Ellis, who was the officer or an authorized person, and that he failed to comply with a lawful command, or that the defendant must have actually resisted by what he did, said, or but physical violence is not necessary. Second, that the defendant knew or had reason to know that Officer Ellis was a police officer performing his duties at the time. Third, that the defendant gave, or I'm sorry, that the officer gave the defendant a lawful command, was making a lawful arrest, or was otherwise performing a lawful act. In this particular case, the officer was in complete uniform and in a fully marked vehicle, activated lights and a siren indicating that the defendant was to stop. The defendant failed to stop, drove to wherever he was going or wherever he felt like stopping, pulled into a driveway, exited the vehicle, and attempted to rush inside of a home based on the evidence and the testimony, to which the officer I saw on the body cam exit the vehicle. I didn't hear any commands. However, I think under the circumstances, the officers, and it appears based on the age or the years in which Officer Rogers is here, that she's obviously being trained, and that Jake Ellis is the officer that's training her, and maybe under the circumstances failed to, or maybe the body cam didn't pick up. I know there's a delay before the audio picks up, so I don't know if it's just something that was missed, but I heard no command stop or anything of that nature. But based on what I saw, it was reasonable for me to believe that the defendant knew that the officers were there for him and that he was supposed to stop, and his response was, I just want to go home, I'm not doing anything. That's not what your options are when you are stopped for a traffic stop. The court satisfied based on the testimony that there was reason for the defendant to know that the officers were performing a duty and that they were making a traffic stop. I also believe that the testimony and evidence support by a probable cause standard that the officer gave a lawful command or was making or performing a lawful act. Although there was no statement to stop, the officers had been following him with a siren and light flash. He pulls into a driveway and not really all the way into the driveway, and immediately exits the vehicle and tries to hop out. And officers run behind him, and he slips, and it looks like he slips at least, and they fall on top of him. He's taken into custody. The court satisfied as to the elements of count 2 that will be bound over to the circuit court. Both counts are bound over for a bind over date. The 5th of March. Today's the March 5th, and that's not the date, sir, that you need to appear in the circuit court. That's a date the circuit court will get the file from the district court. Your next court date will be a pre-trial in the circuit court, okay? Do you have any questions for the court? Bond was set at 3,010%, and that will continue. Any additional matters for the record?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, Your Honor.
You're all set.